for today. And that for today bit would create an internal rage inside of me. And of course, one day I snapped and I just said, like, what do you mean for today? It's always for today. I'm telling you, this is what I'm doing. This is how it's going to be. And he smiled at me and he said, okay, but I say that it looks right for today because it does. But tomorrow, it might be wrong. And I said, no, it's going to be right. And he shook his head. It's right for today. No. And he laughed. And he said something that comes back to haunt me now, because I also say this to my own mentees and participants on the course. And he leaned in and he said, Mel, be happy that it looks right for today, because you don't yet know what you don't know. And that incensed me even further. But I look back now and I realize he was, of course, right. I didn't know what I didn't know. And actually, that was okay, and part of the process of learning how to manage a game studio. So, who am I and why am I talking to you today? My name is Melissa Phillips, and I've been in the games industry for a really long time, probably too long. I work as an operations consultant, mainly for indie studios, and I'm the director of Games Leadership, an online games industry resource that teaches and shares best practice for leadership in the games industry. And we run our main 12-week program, which is called the Games Leadership Blueprint, and that helps senior and emerging leaders to plan their next steps for their teams. I'm a psychologist and also a certified coach, and I've been working in games now for over a decade, mainly in operations, and I'm still making games today. And even though my business is around leadership training, I'm still very much working in studios, helping to set up their processes, creating strategies for more future-focused sustainability, and of course, helping to support people with like people management and development of teams. And I see a lot of new studios, and some succeed and do really well, and some don't. And it can be difficult sometimes to understand why one studio does better than another. But from the work that I do, I get to see some of those stories behind why studios succeed and others fail. And I've started to turn those into training sessions and courses for games leadership. So before we begin, just want to take a quick look at the topics that I'm going to try and cover for today's talk. So I'm going to start by talking about the realities of actually running a game studio and why leadership matters at all in this space. And this will bring us into acknowledging that there's usually a shift in mindset that has to happen when we make the transition from being a game developer to when we move into running a studio. And this is sometimes very subtle, but they are important changes. And then we're going to take a look specifically at some of the challenges that I see in startup game studios before finally exploring how we can develop our leadership skills and what we can do to combat some of those things that we are seeing in games leadership. And if there's time at the end, then I'm also more than happy to answer any questions. So please do throw across any thoughts or questions as I'm speaking into the chat. I think there's an open chat running already. I'm happy for you to type and talk amongst yourselves in there, share your own experiences, hold a discussion. So don't worry about distracting me or anything like that. I'd much rather see lots of messages and people sharing and talking about their experiences. And also just a heads up, I do have a couple of dogs in the room. You might hear little snorings and little snuffles. And if the doorbell goes, you might hear some barking. So I apologize in advance if we are interrupted. Okay. Let's get going. And I'm going to start with some honesty. Running a game studio is not the same as making games. And that might sound obvious, but it's something that catches a lot of new studio founders off guard. And I know many of you might be thinking, like, I love making games, so I'll start a studio of my own and I'll do it my way. And that's great. That passion is essential and what we need in the games industry. But the reality is that running a studio isn't just about making the game you want to make. It's about running a business. And that means dealing with a whole range of responsibilities beyond game development. And as a studio owner, many of you will have already discovered that you don't just have one job anymore. You have many. One moment you're the designer, the next you might be reviewing the budget, then you're handling a legal contract, negotiating with a publisher, or you might be dealing with a team conflict. And in the early days, you usually don't have the luxury of like a dedicated people person for HR, maybe a finance team or a marketing department. So in many cases, it's just you and a handful of other people all trying to wear these multiple hats at once. And this can be really exciting. Startup game studios are amazing places to be, but it's also exhausting. So there's going to feel a lot of times where this feels really tough. There's going to be highs, there's going to be lows, and there's going to be lots of things that change and shift around that you wouldn't necessarily experience in another industry. Running a game studio is quite a unique experience, but especially when we look at that business of making games, it stands out from any other industry that I can think of. I obviously run a company called Games Leadership. We're a training company that is focused on the experience of leading a game studio, so managing development teams and ultimately making games. And one of the reasons that I founded Games Leadership was because when I was first given the opportunity to manage a game studio, I was quite shocked at the lack of support and information and discussion around that. I was also super lucky. Like, I have a really good network of friends and colleagues in the industry, so I was able to go to people really making an impact already and ask for their advice. But time and time again, the response would be that as an industry, we don't have set structures or models that outline what best practice looks like. And there's an argument that a lot of leadership development happens on the job. Like my mentor from my story earlier alluded to, you don't know what you don't know. So a lot of learnings are going to happen from the experience of just leading, which means failing, making mistakes, and then trying to stay on top of the role itself. And I think we sort of expect that. As business owners, it can feel very overwhelming, even if you're the best developer and you've been really good at making games and working in a game studio most of your life. That movement into a leadership position and ultimately starting a studio often comes with a lot of unknowns. And that's totally normal. We kind of expect that. Starting a business doesn't sound easy. But there's going to be a lot of learnings that happen very naturally just in the process of building that studio. And we've got to get real cool, real fast with trying stuff out. And if it's not working, then choosing what we take forward from that or adapting to a new outcome. And that's business. That's just relationships. That's life. However, so on one hand, leadership happens naturally. We're going to learn from things. But I'm also a believer that there are aspects of leadership that can be studied and taught and ultimately prepared for, which can give studios the edge on speeding up or allowing for some of these processes to come through, especially when we pair that with like the game making process. What can we do in the business that helps making games? What can we do in our making of games that helps the business? And so that's what I've dedicated my career to, is finding those moments, those pieces that specifically relate and resonate with making games and ultimately running a game studio. So why does any of this matter? The biggest reason is that times are changing, not just in how we make games, but in how we run studios, and also what talent is looking for when they are searching for studios to join. So definitely in the UK at the moment, but also we're seeing this in wider games landscapes, there's this shift in sustainability for studios. We know that there's been mass layoffs in the last year, and studios are rebalancing their overspending and overgrowing from the COVID period. And sometimes there's been mismanagement of projects within that space. And we're seeing this kind of favor of a smaller business model, leaner business model. So a role of responsibility for leadership is to plan for sustainability. How do we create a business that is going to last? And then also hand in hand with that, we're seeing in the current industry that there's a need for managing uncertainty. And this might be responding to or navigating changing funding opportunities for your business, or it could do with the changes in the need of your team, what it needs now versus in the next 6 months to a year. Or it might fall on those changes needed within the game itself. Is the game working? Is it what you originally intended? Are there new mechanics coming in that feel impossible to build? Is our scope changing? So leadership matters because we need people who are going to help lead a team through those different moments of tension. And this doesn't mean getting it right every time, but that resilience of being able to keep the project moving forward. And then finally, leadership matters because a lot of what the games industry really needs right now is good leadership. We're making a load of learnings, and I complain a lot, and I've definitely complained before, that we often see that we see people sort of make this excuse that the games industry is such a young industry. And when we compare it to something like farming or medicine, yes, those things have been around for ages, and games and tech is still very young in comparison. But we shouldn't use the excuse that we are a young industry to not set expectations and good standards about how we're going to build our studios. And of course, the concept of business is not a new thing. Games might be, but business is not. And so if you're going to start to build a new studio, you really have an opportunity here to learn from the previous mistakes that we've seen in the industry, because it is all relatively new and we can see it happening now in real time, and build upon that in a more positive way. And I do think that the next generation of studios are going to have a real opportunity to create something amazing that embraces new ways of creating games and working in a development team. And I think that's really exciting. Like, there's a real opportunity for those studios that are starting now. And one of the biggest surprises for people starting their own studio is how different it is from just working on a game with a team. And at first glance, they might seem the same thing, a group of people making a game together. But the reality is that there's a fundamental difference between game team and game studio. And if we don't recognize that difference early on, then the studio can run into problems real fast. And so the biggest difference is that a game team is focused on the project, the designs, the mechanics, the art, the tech, and the goal is to make the best game as possible, meet the deadlines, and collaborate creatively. But a game studio is more than just the game. It's about making sure that the studio can continue to create multiple games over time. It's about that sustainability piece, funding, operations, and the people behind those games. It's about creating a business. And so I've put it into two different sections here, of some of the questions that you might hear come from both sides. And of course, these aren't perfect questions, but I've just kind of thrown in. A game team might ask, like, how do we make this game, and why this game? Why are we making this game, and who or what resources are we going to need to make this game and make it really stand out? And then some of the questions that you'll get from the game studio side is like, how are we going to pay the team to keep making this game and further games? How are we going to prevent them from burning out? How do we build this game in a way that is going to be kind and care for the people that are making it? And ultimately, how do we keep the studio running after the game has finished? How do we create opportunities for the team and the studio in general? And how can we engage with the people that are interested in our games and create that brand and move it forwards? And these are quite different questions that we get asked. And often they get kind of jumbled up together, but actually they're quite separate. One is about creating the product of the game. The other is about sustaining that product. And so a game team works within a structure. A game studio builds that structure around the team. And I just want to note that, like, a game team works within that structure. We have very clear defined roles and responsibilities for who is doing what. but then we should also be responsible for how we build the structure around that. So that doesn't just mean that process is involved in making a game, but the process involved in hiring the team, onboarding them, offboarding them, and supporting them to be more successful. So you think of it like a spider web. It goes out in circles. And then this feels a little bit more controversial. I just want to sort of note that a game team relies on direction. So often the game is run by the creative director. It's them feeding their vision into the idea of the game. But I would challenge that a game studio relies more on leadership. It's more about the culture that is being created and how that is communicated to both the employees of that team, but also the people outside of that, the culture that is being created around the brand itself. And then let me move on. So just give me a moment whilst I open up my notes. Because I'd like to talk to you a bit about the shift in mindset. So here we go. We've talked about the reality of running a studio and how it's very different from being part of a game team. But now let's talk about one of the biggest challenges that you're going to face when you're starting your own studio. And this is the shift in mindset as you move from being a developer into the studio leader. And so the shift is huge. And I cannot understate this. Like the shift is massive. It's something that we see a lot of new studio owners struggle with. And people often get very upset about this, as so often you have someone at the start of their studio journey who is both the CEO and creative director. So they're responsible for both getting that game vision communicated, but also for leading the business of the studio. And I want to be really clear here. Like, I'm not saying that you have to choose either or position. You can absolutely be both CEO and creative director, but there's a subtle shift here in that many responsibilities that you've had previously as a developer will change. And in many cases, those responsibilities will need to be handed over to your team. And so I see a lot of bitterness come from this sometimes with studio leaders who wanted to make a cool game at the start and had great ideas for the game that they were making, but are now not as involved in actually making that game. They've managed to get funding. It's all going to be an amazing experience. And actually what we see now for them as the business owner is that they're kind of fighting to see themselves as being part of that game making process. And that's difficult because they've now got all these other business responsibilities. So I wanted to kind of make that distinction in the potential shift in responsibilities is just something to be aware of when you're moving into the role of leadership. And when I think about this idea of vision, then it's really easy to get trapped into the idea of the responsibility on leaders in the games industry to hold the vision for the project. And I've definitely done it myself. But the more I work with different leaders the more it becomes just obvious by how little that means without being able to communicate it effectively. So achieving alignment in a team can be a real challenge. You can easily hand over a game design document and expect that covers everything. But making games isn't just about getting people to follow orders. It's about creating a shared vision for that team. And once everyone understands what their role is and what they need to do, then you can move forward together. So as a leader, you may be the one expected to hold the vision for a project, but you must also be able to extend that to others and ensure that the entire team is on board and understands what you're saying and is equipped to be able to do that. It's about mutual trust and, as always, great communication. And from my experience now, what I've observed is that studios are changing. Or at least what team members, people that you're going to employ to make your game want from studios is changing. So this idea of leaders as vision holders is now much more than just being a keeper or generator of ideas. We often think of, I'll start a studio because it's got a great idea and that's all it needs. It now needs more than that. It needs you to be able to communicate and extend that to your team and be prepared to provide what they need in order to execute on their part and do it well. And that's because we want to make great games. So there we go. Just going to go back to that. So leaders holding the vision is not enough. Team alignment is about sharing a vision, communication, and mutual trust. And I want to just move us on to the challenges that you're going to see in your first year of running a studio. And obviously this is different for everyone, but here are some of the challenges that I think can affect leadership in a game studio in the first year, which can have huge consequence on the overall success. And obviously it's going to be different for everyone, but here are just some of the challenges that I see affecting the studios that I'm working with at the moment. So that's decision fatigue, consistency, and overpromising. So the first on my list is decision fatigue. And I think this is something that often takes people by surprise. So just the amount of decision making and expectation on you as a studio leader to have all of the answers for your next step. And the weight of this can often feel hugely overwhelming, and just the day-to-day management of fielding all these questions and jumping from one topic to another can be mentally draining. So you may have heard the phrase, death by 1,000 cuts. And this is really usable here because it's not just about these questions that are unanswerable, although sometimes they can be. It's about the sheer number of questions that you're going to get coming your way on a day-to-day basis. And this can often lead to two very different extremes. So on one hand, leaders can very quickly want to try and grab control of the situation. And so they don't want to delegate the answering of these questions, and it can feel like they tighten control and become very guarded or over having ownership of these different decisions. And then on the other end of the scale, you might see leaders who completely remove themselves. They fall inward and they get decision paralysis, where they become so afraid of giving those answers that everything starts to kind of pile up behind them. And very quickly, leaders can become a bottleneck for their studio. So even if they don't intend for that to happen, they can find themselves right at the end. Apologies for my dog's barking. We've got a parcel arrived. So even if they don't intend to become a bottleneck, they can find themselves as this kind of funnel where all of the questions now have to come to them, that they have to tick it off in order for anybody on the team to move forward. So everybody's blocked until they move it on. And the reality is that you're always going to have decisions to be made coming at you. And more often than not, it's going to feel like you're having to make decisions that have really big consequences for both your studio and the team. Next up is consistency. And this is my next challenge. And this is often highly related to decision fatigue. And it becomes increasingly hard to stay focused and remember that all the moving parts that you're responsible for, as well as to try and show up with the same energy levels when you're in a state of overwhelm. So I see a lot of burnout in studio leaders that can be traced back to their early startup stage. And this happens for a lot of different reasons. So that sudden early burst of movement and motivation and is intoxicating, because you're seeing your studio suddenly get funding and people are very excited by that. The stakes feel really high and you're trying to create something brilliant. But that can be really hard to create boundaries with yourself when you really want to see your business succeed. And game studios move really quickly. I've seen studios go from having nothing to suddenly have all the funding they ever needed and all the resources that they asked for. But then there's new pressures coming in here. Maybe a publisher or an investor is now expecting that game to be made, and it really adds pressure from an outside source. So it's great to get swept along with all this excitement, but it's really easy to lose that sense of control and boundaries. So attempting to build consistent practices is absolutely vital for the success of your studio in that early stage. And then last on my list was over-promising. And this is one of the biggest killers for new studios. Committing to things that you can't realistically deliver. And this is a bit of a paradox, because when you start your studio, as I said earlier, you don't yet know what you don't yet know. But I can pretty much promise you that you're already overscoping and you're over-promising on your game delivery. Or maybe you're over-promising to the team that you're bringing on. Like I just promise you that. I'm not being mean. We all do this. This is inherently a human thing. So we all come with lots of different hopes and dreams, especially at the start of a new project. And what happens there, that there is a process that starts to take place within the project timeline where the dream of what we wanted to achieve and the reality of what we can realistically achieve and deliver aren't quite meeting, and eventually they will meet in the middle. And for many studios, this meeting of the dream and the reality often comes too late. So I've added over-promising here, not to scare you, but as a warning that one of your biggest challenges in your first year is going to have to be to try and prepare yourself for what you have over-promised early on, and what you can actually focus on to achieve is the reality. So many leaders struggle with what they see in this first year. They count it as a failure, and I see a lot of leaders get very uncomfortable with that. It's not a failure. It's a mistake that every single leader in the games industry makes. We overscope and we overpromise. What you now have to do in that first year is be able to scope and rescope your plans. And this is a skill that comes from experience. So the sooner you can kind of get okay with that, the better. It's failing to acknowledge the overpromising that has the biggest consequences for your studio. And that's what often leads to crunch and burnout and a high turnover rate in your team that might otherwise have been avoided. So hopefully I haven't scared everyone off in starting their studio. So if you're still with me, then you're probably wondering about how you can begin to solve some of these problems. What can we put in place for your leadership to help you develop the skills that you need in order to kind of take on some of these challenges? And one of the biggest differences that I see between great leaders and those that are just surviving is that great leaders spend time on themselves. And this doesn't just mean having a work-life balance or getting enough sleep. What I mean is that they're doing the hard work of challenging themselves to understand why they do what they do. And for some, this can look like going to therapy, or others, it might be mindfulness practices, or maybe further learning or studying. But one of the biggest things I see in great leaders is that they invest in themselves. All change starts with self-awareness. If I can't see something could be better, unless I'm in that place of accepting it, then how do I know that it can be better? So it's allowing those possibilities to come into our mindset. And the difficulty in cultivating self-awareness is that it also needs to be authentic and come from a place of authenticity. And I can't force myself to be more authentic. That has to come from confidence and acceptance and having different experiences that allow us to grow and change. But I can build myself a leadership mindset that allows me to start to notice when these opportunities are arriving for me. So this is something that I very much teach. And as you can imagine, is very different for everyone. There are multiple pathways through. But I really encourage you as leaders, before starting your studio, to take that time to invest in yourself, to understand what you need as a leader, both in terms of support, but also growth in your own career and understanding what you want to get out of that studio experience. So really important that you're clear on the goals for both yourself and the vision for your studio. The next stage of supporting and developing your leadership skills is to build yourself a process where you can continue to receive feedback and discussion around your leadership. So very few leaders really embrace this. Often the excitement of running a studio can come with this belief that finally we get to be in control, that we're on the top of the organization and now every command, every decision will be ours to make. And whilst, yes, a lot of decisions are going to fall on you, it's important that you've got a trusted network and ways to check yourself, that you can keep track and keep growing. Excuse me. And sometimes this can be found within your co-founders, the people that you're building a business with. But I always recommend trying to find an outside source who is less invested in your business that can act as like a common sense check-in. So this might be a coach, a therapist, a mentor, a peer group, or a professional network where you feel safe to explore some of the more difficult aspects of the business or yourself. So for business, I look to my accountant. They've been instrumental in teaching me the areas of business that I was struggling with and explaining the harder pieces to me. And for my own leadership and coaching growth, I have my own coach. And I'm part of 3 different organizations that run regular CPD, networking, and peer practice groups. And then I also have an amazing close friend circle. Some are who are industry and some are who not, who I can call upon to help talk me through whatever challenge that I'm facing. And then finally, my last tip is something that I alluded to earlier, actually, and that is figuring out what success looks like for you and your business. So often, one of the biggest blockers in studios is communication. But that's made so much more difficult if there aren't clear goals and targets to aim for. And as a leader, one of the things that your team are going to look to you for is for you to define what success looks like. What does good look like for our studio? And that's difficult. And I wanted to share something with you that I use within games leadership to teach a little bit about the importance and the different kind of nuances that we see in games. So I created this framework. I'm just going to give you a moment to have a look at it whilst I take a sip. So when I'm creating content for games leadership, I began to notice that there are different levels and different focuses that I come at this from. There are different lenses that we can view the different power dynamics of our studio. And I've split these up into me, you, and us. So me is the leader themselves. It's how I feel about leading, who I am as a leader, and what I'm trying to be. You are the individuals that I directly manage and am responsible for in their career and their progress. And then us, which is how do we bring the messy parts of me and the messy parts of you together, and we create a culture and a studio that ultimately creates a game. And so when I'm setting goals or I'm thinking about success for the studio, I use this framework to remind myself and others in the industry that there are many different lenses that we can look at what success means. And so hopefully, I'm hoping that might spark some thoughts, or you might notice kind of how complex leadership can be within your studio and where you might start to find success in these 3 different areas. It's not just about the culture of the studio itself succeeding. There's also your goals as a leader and what you want to get out of it, but also the individuals that make up your team and their individual hopes and dreams, and kind of what does success look like to each and every one of you. Okay, so we've covered a lot, and thanks for sticking with me. I know there was a lot to take in. I'm going to start to wrap up now, and we'll have a bit of time for questions. But before I do, I just wanted to mention where you can find out a bit more about the topics that I've shared today and where you can find us if you'd like to keep in touch, or perhaps you need some more support navigating your own leadership journey and your studio. So rather excitingly, we're currently going through some changes ourselves. We've continued to grow and help more leaders and studios. And this means that we're changing our look. So we're debuting it here today. As I'm speaking to you, we're currently trying to change our online space. But on screen is where you'll be able to find us. We've got a couple of socials which are at Games Leadership now and going forward. And you can visit the website at www.gamesleadership.com. And now I would love to take any questions that you might have. Dorothy, you're coming back. Hello.
I'm back. Hi. Thank you so much, Melissa. I mean, leadership has always been a complex topic. Some people make it look a lot easier than others. And I mean, as you said, leadership happens naturally, but there are some things that can be taught to make sure that these things are fast tracked. And I think my biggest takeaway from this is that building games is very different from building a game studio. We have that coming up a lot, especially when we're running game jams, and this brings a lot into perspective of the things to think about when you want to actually start a business out of games. Thank you so much for the session. Do we have a couple of questions? So I'm going to read them out with how they came in. So this is Andres who's asking, when working on a game and trying to start a studio, does one need to look for VCs for funding immediately, or what are the other options?
Wow. Gosh. So the answer is it depends, which is very unsatisfactory. Um, every game studio is going to be different, and the funding landscape will look different depending on what sort of game you're making, what sort of studio you're making. Um, I always come back to sustainability. So VCs are great to get that cash injection to build the game that you want. And sometimes that is on the game itself, and sometimes that is investment into your studio business. And so you have to kind of, I guess, make the decision about, who is it that I'm bringing in and what is it that they are offering to us now versus in the future. So if a VC is investing in your business, as in your studio, they are going to be there for the next game and the next game and the next game. If they're investing in your game, they are just there for the game. And those relationships look very different. Those expectations can look very different. And so it's kind of worth figuring out what it is that you need. And again, I come back to like, what does success look like for you in a studio? What do you need right now? And sometimes it looks like I just need to get one game out, and that's fine. Like then VCs might be the answer to that. But I would also look ahead and be like, well, what does my studio look like in 5-10 years time? And if I'm bringing on a VC that is going to be with me for that journey, how are they going to support me with that, and what is their role going to look like? Hopefully that helps.
Yeah, thanks, Melissa. I hope that answers your question. Sorry, something in my throat. We have another question from Bra Justice. What is the minimum number of persons needed to build a successful game studio?
Oh, how long is a piece of string? I, we have a lot of talk about solo devs at the moment. So there's lots of like, oh, look at this person that by themselves made a hit game. I think that's a little bit of a myth. I don't necessarily believe in solo devs. I have seen it done very well. But normally we aren't perfect at everything. We have to bring in experts that are good at the things that we're not good at. And actually that's kind of what we should be doing, right? We can't be perfect at everything. Very rarely, I think, is anybody brilliant at everything. So recognizing what we need the support in and bringing in that team is really an important part of how you're going to build your studio. Some people, especially indies, I said in the early days, everybody's kind of bootstrapping and wearing lots of hats. So you might take on 3 or 4 roles. And for me, one of my values of success is, can I let go of some of the roles that I'm not so good at and invest in somebody that is good at those things? That's kind of my success, is like I now have enough resource that I can bring in a person to do that. And that's how I would grow my team. But again, it looks different for everybody. What is the perfect number? Depends on the game that you're making. It depends on the resources that you've got at the start. It's likely you'll be doing a lot of things yourself. But having that plan that you can then adapt to, like, what does this game look like now, and who's going to be better suited to that? That can always tell you, like, when do I need to grow, and is it time, and what do I need next? So feel it out.
All right, thanks, Mel. I think what's really coming out is that it looks very different from everyone, depending who's the leader and what their skills are and what the team will look like. So that is going to look different. Next question. We have three more. We have the time. This is from Eric. He asks, how do I create a culture that balances good outputs with a healthy work environment in a hybrid work environment mixed that's remote and in-person workers?
Oh, this is a great question. Yes, we've started to see more remote studios, and I do a lot of work with remote studios. And there's often a question of like, do we still have the same culture of working in in-house studio and like you say, hybrid and mixed and remote workers? And it's difficult. Like it is a challenge. How do I create a culture that balances good outputs with a healthy work environment in a hybrid work environment? Always comes down to communication. I think it's acknowledging those in the studio physically are going to have more opportunity for communication. It just happens naturally. When you're sat next to somebody, you can lean over and go, hey, what are you working on? I can hear conversations happening in the studio that if I'm working at home, I'm not privy to. And so for me, I would encourage the communication around those additional conversations that are happening. And that can be difficult to harness because it's getting an awareness within those that are working, and anytime a meeting is being held, to have that question in the back of their mind of like, who else needs to know this information and how do I communicate that, and how can we all agree on a method to communicate that so that those working remotely are also fed in and kept in the loop of this, so that we're not creating that kind of us versus them culture. So gosh, some ways in which I've seen that be successful is just a very simple, hey, was just chatting about this, and they put it into the Slack channel or the Discord, and they say, just updating you on this. It's also having conscious conversations within that moment of like, that was great, that's really useful, what are the action points from that conversation that we've just had, and who needs to be kept in the loop with that. And it can feel very strange at first when we try and have those conversations as though we're engineering it, but it's a good habit to get into, of like remembering that there are people that are not in that conversation that need to be looped in. And I think that's about building that trust within the teams of how they want to be fed information, having those conversations about how do we relay that information, and ultimately like what are our meetings for, and how do we speak to each other, but also how do we record those meetings, and how do we create action from those meetings. There we go. I think that's, if there's more to that, let me know.
Yeah, great answer, Mel. This is from Cephas. You said that there's games might be a young industry, but there's a lot of in a game studio with the constraints of budget and timeline in game development.
Yes, this is an age-old fight, I think, for the games industry. How do you balance the need for creative innovation with the constraints of budget and timeline in game development? How do you allow for creativity and iteration and all of the things that creatives want versus all of the things that often the studio needs, which is kind of production schedules and operational timelines and deadlines that are coming in. And this is a balance that's going to happen constantly. You're going to constantly be reviewing, like, do we have time to allow for that iteration? Do we have time for that change? And it comes back to scope, which, as I said, is a skill. Knowing how you scope something comes with practice. Do we have enough time to build that? What happened last time? Did we go over budget? Did we come in under? Did we have extra time? Is this team a team that I've worked with before and I trust to get this right? It's going to come slowly with experience. Again, comes back to communication. Sometimes it's, from what I see, some of the kind of biggest arguments that we see come out of this are those that are, it's just people have different priorities. So the creative comes in wanting to make an amazing game, and they've got all of these great ideas that they want to explore, versus the operational brain that is like, well, we don't have time to do that. And it's going to rub because there are different priorities from two different parties. Anytime that you have different priorities and team members are coming in with different priorities, that is a time to negotiate. I think it has to it's very difficult, I think, to get both sides to be comfortable, because one is fighting. They're on different ends of the spectrum. One is fighting for one, the other is fighting for the other. But it comes down to negotiation. So what does that look like? It might be being very clear about how long we have to iterate on this idea. You know, can we set a deadline that we're all happy with? Can we do a little bit more exploration? Or do we have to accept the reality that there is no more time to do that? And sometimes that can be really hard for a creative, because they want to create an amazing game. And do we have to now grieve for the game that we wanted to make and accept that the game that we're now making is slightly different? But it's really hard. I feel for you when that situation arises.
This really brings into perspective the number of decisions that one has to make being a leader, right? And in the creative industry, there are several to make, and managing people, managing ideas, and deciding which one goes forward. Thanks, Severus, for that question. We're going to take two more. One is by Waweru. Waweru asks, are there any foreign game studios that are open to adopting African concepts? And if so, where does one start?
I guess by concepts, does that mean sort of game ideas, sort of narratively, or game projects? Yes, is the answer, if that is the question. Like, I've seen lots of kind of new African concepts and things from mythology coming through. There's like a lot of like Afrofuture games that I've seen like coming in development at the moment. But where does one start? Great question. If there was an answer to that, everybody would be lining up outside whoever it was that was handing out money for those concepts, and we would all be trying to do it. How do we start getting interest in a concept that is culturally based? I would start to look at, I guess, funding opportunities that are out there. I'm not sure what is currently available from the African funding landscape, but there are certainly funds that do exist and come around that are very interested in culture and kind of focused on that. There are game jams that come out often with themes, and that's worth looking into as well. And I guess it's about presenting a pitch document that kind of shows the passion of what it is that you're trying to produce. So I'd be really interested in kind of exploring what adopting African concepts means to you, and what that looks like in a game, before I'd be able to, I think, advise any further on that. But it is a great question, and I'm curious. I want to kind of have a chat with them elsewhere.
All right, we can make that happen. So our very last question is by Richard. What are the core roles of, for example, developer artist that are needed to start a game team?
Everyone's going to have a differing set of answers to this. I'll tell you my personal preference, and then people can get mad. So I think that to start making a game, you need somebody that has the ability to make a game. And this comes down to kind of technical design. The ideas of a game start with a great designer. But you also need somebody that can implement that design and create a working demo. So having a great idea is not enough. You need somebody that can create that and put it into play. And then that's about making the game. But if I come back to like what makes a game studio and the business, I would also make an argument for like an operational person, somebody that is understanding the structure of business, knows how to hire a team, knows how to run a business. So I guess it depends. I mean, the question was, how do I start a great game team? You need a great idea with a great game designer that knows what they need and understands how games are made. And then you need somebody that can start to create that in a game engine. A great idea alone is not enough. But that's controversial. You could fight me on that.
All right, amazing. Thank you so much, Melissa, for your time, for the very amazing insights on what it takes to be a leader, what to build up on, and also the challenges that people might face. I think this is something that people need to be aware of when they're getting into that space to be leaders and starting game studios and making a business out of a game studio. Thank you so much for your
My
time.
pleasure. Thank you for having me.
All right, great. We're going to move on to the next phase of the meetup. And we're going to be having Andy Koshi from Ghana, who is an emerging leader in the game industry. He is the founder of Organized Chaos, and they're working on a game, Echo, which is going to present. Aside from Echo, he's also going to be sharing his experience working as a leader within the game industry, right? So we've heard from Melissa on how this can look like, and Andy's going to be sharing his experience from what he has faced. Andy, welcome. Nice to have you today.
Hello, everyone. Nice to meet you all. My name is Andy, and I'm here to give a talk on a chaotic journey through game development. Just a quick introduction about me. My name is Andy Koshisheri. I'm the co-founder and studio lead for Organized Chaos. Organized Chaos is an indie studio founded in Accra, Ghana, in West Africa. We are currently starting up. We just started in 2024, but I would circle back to that eventually. I've been working in the industry professionally for around 4 years now, going to 5. I've been working in various studios in and around Accra, Ghana. I've worked in Letty Arts, if any of you know them, and also worked in Nubian VR. And from there, I've been able to amass a lot of knowledge and learned a lot. As Melissa said, it's not just about making games. There's a lot that goes into running a game studio, and I've been able to learn a lot. And I've taken the knowledge I've learned from those studios, and I've decided to start my own studio with my own sensibilities, which is Organized Chaos. So why am I here? I'm here to share the journey of I've learned across learning from all the different things I've learned, building different games with other studios, and also founding within the space, building games within Africa. So what is Organized Chaos? So we are an indie game studio focused on creating fun narrative focused games and financially sustainable games from Africa for the world. We say financially sustainable because we want to actually make money. We realize that you need to make money as a studio. It's a business, as Melissa mentioned. We are not here to just make one individual game. We're here to make money and actually continue have a sustainable business that we can continually pay people and have a sustainable business from. And that's the idea behind Organized Chaos. Now, the dream team, I don't know if any of you know however, I don't know if any of you are interested in basketball or anything. I'm a huge basketball fan, And in 1992, the Americans had this like whole debacle of sending NBA players to the Barcelona Olympics in Spain, and they amassed like they sent like all their best NBA players, and they called them like the Dream Team. So we call ourselves the Dream Team. The Dream Team for Organized Chaos currently is made up of 3 people. That's like our main core studio right now. We are Andy, that's made up of me. That's me, the lead game designer and studio lead. Ravi is our arts lead, and Ebenezer, who is our programming lead. But it's been a long road getting here. Organized Chaos has been in the works, as you can see. It's actually started out as an idea from like 2017 when I was actually doing an internship with a few friends, and we came up with this idea, and then it just got lost in the wind. And I put it down, forgot about it, never really thought about it again, and it's just been here for a while, just been rolling in the wind up until 2024 when I woke up one day. Like I didn't wake up, I actually didn't wake up one day. It has been, it's been mulling at the back of my head, and I was like, okay, I think I should start like a studio. Like I'd been planning to start a studio for a while because I was like, okay, I felt that I had an approach that no one had tried yet, and I'd also learned a lot from all the different experiences I had. So I wanted to try something here. I'd met a few people, I talked to them, they were like it was actually a good idea. So the day I actually wanted to like start something, I had a call from my co-founder, and he speaks to me and he's like he wants to start a studio. So I was like, oh, this is actually a sign. And then that's the day Organized Chaos officially started, and we rebranded, and the rest is history. So we've had a few games in development. We've done Break Blast, and we've also done Chaos Skaters. This unfortunately wasn't released. We had a few issues with this one. So actually, we were working on this one, and then we had to pivot, and I would explain why. This was why. So we were working on Chaos Skaters, and then we saw the call for the Democracy Game Jam, and it piqued our interest. So you might ask, what made us participate in the game jam? So now there are 3 main things that made us participate in the game jam. The first thing was the theme. The theme was really interesting. The theme was, if I could go back, the theme was misinformation, but it's now malign influence. But it was, when it came to us, it was misinformation. And the reason why the theme sounded so interesting was because, I come from both a game designing and a development background, and it was very interesting because it was like I've never really how do you make a game about misinformation fun? It was a very interesting idea. So we were like, okay, how could we do this? And right. And another thing was like our team is a very we are a very competitive group of people. So we were like, hey, can we, it was a competition between Kenya, Ghana, and I believe Nigeria. So we're like, do we think we're good enough to defeat everyone here? So we're like, yeah, let's try this. The last reason too was also the prize pool. So we were like, yes, let's try it. So these were the 3 main reasons. One, we loved the theme. 2, we were very competitive and thought we could beat everyone. And 3, the prize pool was very interesting. So in working on the game, that we decided to work on the game, the tools we ended up using were Discord, Figma, Miro, Trello, sorry, GitHub, Google Drive, and Google Docs. I'm sure most of you know these tools already. You already have like experience with most of these tools. Discord for like communication, Figma for UI design and wireframing, Miro for just mind mapping and just sketching ideas, Trello for project management, GitHub for source control, Google Drive for assets, and Google Docs for our game design docs. So these are screenshots from the game. Unfortunately, I couldn't put videos here, but basically the idea behind the game, the concept we ended up going with for Echo was to have a or the story behind Echo in the end was for you to be forgive me, my mind just went blank for a second. But yeah, you are a content moderator, and you work from you work from with a social media company called Ecosphere, and the idea behind it is like you are given like information, and you are supposed to review posts that are given to you, and you review these posts. So these screenshots are actually from like the game jam. These were made from the game jam. Like these were made within the game jam time period. And you're supposed to review posts that are given to you and confirm if they contain misinformation or if they don't contain misinformation. And each day, so it at the game jam within the game jam, I think it was it's a 3 day within the game jam that you play within 3 days within the game within the game's time period. I mean, and you are supposed to like review each day. You get a set number of posts, and you're supposed to review if each post within the day contains misinformation or doesn't contain misinformation. So that was it. It was actually very simple. But then there was an added level of tension where you have like a limited amount of minutes. As you can see, there's a clock on the right side of the screen where it's counting down. So you are trying to like do as many posts as you can, but also if you get it wrong, you lose money. The money is important because if you lose too much money, you end up being broke, right? Because you're trying to get enough money to end the day. So that was the idea. It was like a balancing sheet of, don't do the wrong thing too much, but also do the right thing. And it wasn't like we leave you like hanging and dry. There was also like a mail on the left side that would give you information on what is information, what is misinformation, what is disinformation. And the timer didn't start until you clicked on something that you were ready. So it was like very balanced to allow you to take your time and all that kind of thing. So that was like the concept behind the game. And the main lesson we learned whilst making this game was finding the fun. I made this big because um, it was a huge problem for us. I don't know if all the other teams also had this problem, but finding the fun was a problem for us because I believe I'm sorry I keep on laughing, but I believe finding the fun was a huge problem because I think other teams also had that problem where if you look at their games, you would see it was basically just a trivia of is this misinformation or is this no misinformation, right? It was now okay, can we just wrap it around the narrative? Which is something if you notice, like with organized chaos, we have this pillar within our studio of wanting to always tell stories within our games, not just having like because the idea behind games is it's a medium, it's a stronger medium than just movies. It's an active medium, if you ask me, right? But that was like something that was a huge problem for us finding the fun. So that was a lesson we were like, find the fun. I mean, this obviously it is self-explanatory. It's straight, you should know, but it's important. Like ideally, someone would just go like, yeah, you have like something, you should look good or whatever. But the fun is important. I think Melissa even mentioned like, yeah, the idea is great, but like find the fun. Because one thing I would say, we at Organized Chaos, we can build anything. Like I might be, I might be pushing our team a little bit further here, but I would say like our team can build anything. But the fun, like finding a very unique way to push the fun was the problem. But in all seriousness, though, the lessons we learned from this project, which funny enough are things that Melissa mentioned. So when Melissa was speaking, I was like, wow, like I'm about to just go through everything she went through. She mentioned already was scope properly. Don't like scope is one thing you don't want to creep up on you, right? Because like if you like she said, like we are not experts. Like as much as I've written scope here, it would catch you, it would mess up with you. You want to be able to have that you would overpromise. You would think, oh yeah, we can achieve this. Yeah, like like I literally just did it. I was like, my team can build anything. Can your team actually build everything? Right? So that's like we literally just did it right now. But that's the thing, scope properly, right? Don't make that mistake. You want that, like you don't want to make that mistake. Scope creep is real. The next thing is don't just communicate, over communicate. Communication is key. Another thing where like I think I don't know if it's like the same for me. I used to think that if I'm talking to people or if like if I keep on texting people and maybe I'm worrying them or something like that, it is not like that at all. If you are not sure of something, talk to them. Make sure they are aware of it. And I make sure my team knows that if they are not aware of something or if they are not sure of something, they call, they text. They are not disturbing anyone. They have to be they have to confirm if a text is not if they are not sure of something they saw on Discord, call the person to confirm what you just saw in the text, right? It's very important. Don't just communicate, over communicate. The next thing is start small and polish well. So, like I said, you'd want to start with something quite small so that polishing is actually quite easy. I don't know if I could go back a little bit back into like a previous. If I could go back a few slides back, you would notice how polished um our our scenes looked. It was because we did like smaller scenes, and this was because we actually with my team, like we actually looked at, okay, what did we want, how can we like reduce our scope, how can we make it easy for our artists to like represent each space without having to like stress too much about all the environments. We actually went through each space because so we did like an AI first. We actually did like an AI overview. We did like you know storyboarding with like an AI with prompts. He took a look at it. He was like, okay, he sees what he likes what he sees. What can he do with this? Took them as inspiration and then did his own thing based on the prompts. You want to have that mindset and plan, right? Again, goes back to scope. Stay flexible. Flexibility is very important. Now, this might be a good lesson for working in a game jam, but this also goes back to also being just in a studio, like as well. Like, um, if you are working as a studio in Africa, you want to be able to be flexible. That's another reason. Like for anything you're doing, you want to be able to like be malleable. I will give extra advice at the end, but that's just something you want to keep in mind. And finally, feedback is pure gold. Give it to people. Let them test. Let them tell you it's bad. Let them tell you it's the worst thing they've ever played. Take it back. Like ask them exactly what it is that is the worst thing that they've ever played. Get the feedback and use that as motivation to fix the problem, right? You need that feedback. Don't get too attached to whatever it is you're working on. Don't get too attached to whatever it is you are working on. It's very important. Both like as a developer and artist, it's very important to not get too attached to whatever it is you're working on. Yes, like as an artist, I know like most artists get really attached because it's their work of art. Don't get too attached to whatever it is you're working on because the feedback is important to help you get better. So what the win meant for us. So the win was, and we were happy. We actually won. We were actually second place. We weren't first place, which was still an amazing thing. We were second place. We were very happy about it. The team unfortunately was I was still quite happy. The team, unfortunately, I think I did a too good of a job motivating my team because I kind of told them, oh, we'll be first. Like I told them, you guys are amazing, you guys are the best, we'll be first. So I think when we won second, they were kind of down. So I had to, I think that night after we won, I sent the whole team just an uplifting message telling them that I was very proud of what they've done and they had done a really amazing job, and I was so proud of everything, and we can keep going. This is just to prove that we are not actually the best, and we need to put in the work to continue so that the next time we would be undeniably the best. Um, so that was so that was like, I guess yes. I guess I don't know. I guess it's up to whoever it is you're looking at. But yeah, um, I told them, and actually they were really encouraged by the words I gave them, and it made I guess it made me happy, and it made them happy too as well. Post game jam development, we again, because we didn't have much time during the game jam, we pivot like we had to like really restrict ourselves with what we're doing in terms of art, in terms of development. Now we have much more time to like, develop our art style and expand our scope and do a lot of crazy things, which we are doing. I wish I could show gameplay, but I can't, unfortunately. But we will be showing something off next month during March, on I think the March 20, that's March 27th. I hope you guys. I don't know if Maliyo will be streaming that. That will be awesome. But this is like just the new direction we're going with. It's still the same gameplay, like not the same gameplay, still the same approach, but like we are boosting the art, and also we've tightened the gameplay, and also the interactions and everything. It's amazing. Yeah, it's looking good. So I'll just wrap up here quickly. Uh, So a few words I'll say is like, start small but think big. The reason I say that is, um, as a studio, especially in Africa, most people have like big ideas. I mean, I guess it's from like where we come from, and like having like, especially for me, like I remember when I first started, I wanted to like make Call of Duty and all those big games. But like after spending time in the industry, I still want to make those games, but I need to start somewhere to get there. It's now I've learned that, and I'm working towards that. I don't want to make Call of Duty anymore. I want to make my kind of game. Now I want to make games that um games that I'm proud of making. For example, I'm interested in more narrative games now. Again, that is where I'm coming from. Games that follow a three-act structure. Again, games that feel like movies, not like actual movies, but like if you're playing, for example, that's where we are going with Echo, where even if it's not like a mocap kind of thing, you playing it feels like a movie where you have like an inciting incident, you have like a first plot, but it's just a clicking thing where you'd see a UI and something happens, and you're like, oh my god, what's happening here, right? Like that's how I want, our games to be. Like, this is achievable for us, right? That's what I want to be able to do. And I'm not even saying that's just for me. You guys could also have like bigger, much more crazy ideas, and that's what you guys should be going for. The next thing is collaboration and community is key. Goes back to the first one too as well. If you have any crazy, like you can have any crazy idea, but again, it's a business you're running. I'll put you guys on something. Like, you guys don't always have to always like make your own games. You could create your portfolio based on even like porting existing games. For example, CD Projekt Red, like the guys who did like The Witcher, they started out like porting games. If you know what I mean. Like I know Maliyo Games like put out um a job offer for like an iOS dev. Some, I think they want to like start like porting their games to iOS. Like, I looked at it and I was like, oh, like a studio could actually handle that. Like, another studio could actually handle that separately, where they do like iOS porting, right? That is something that's possible. Or you could do like TV, like smart TV releases, like Samsung TVs. It has, like, obviously it's not going to be the same price as like the development cost is not going to be the same price as the original game. The application is already made, so you are just handling the porting to the TV device. How do you do that? Just make a few projects that run on the smart TV. You have that portfolio. Send that to the company and say, hey, we handle porting to these, devices. We can do that for you. Have a conversation, strike a deal. You are a business person. You are a leader. Try and get those things done. Right? These are things you can do. This is why you're in the community. It's not like this is how you can keep your business running. Right? These are things you can have collaboration with people who are already running things. Yeah, you don't always have to start your own IP. If someone's IP is already running, you can reach out to them and do things with it. Yeah, like I was saying, prioritize scope. But like Melissa said it, and it was like, oh wow, I kept on looking at my notes. I was like, oh my god, um, why is it that I have the same thing she's saying like twice in my notes too as well, but it's in the scope is insane, and none of us are experts. It would always keep on like it would hold your it would creep up, but you always have to find a way to mitigate it and try and handle it. But prioritizing scope management is important always. Staying consistent and learning from every release. Every release goes different every time. It's never going to be the same. It's never going to be the same because there's always something different happening in the world every time, from something else going, that's trending, to something else doing something somewhere, which actually even still goes back to what Melissa was saying at the beginning of her talk, where she said her mentors always told her it's right, like it's this correct for now, right? Because 2 days from now it might not be. Everything changes, right? So you stay consistent, you learn, and the more you learn, the more you understand the field, and the more you understand that it like things can change anyhow, but you you are keeping up with it. The more you keep up with it, the more you can kind of see similarities and understand, hey, okay, this is happening, so I need to kind of like pivot or switch or do this, right? But at least you are up to breast with it and up to date with it. Yeah. So that's my advice. Thank you very much. Any questions?
Thank you so much, Andy, for sharing your story. I mean, it's interesting. It's always nice to get to hear what other people in the same space as you are experiencing, or people who are ahead of you. So you may find someone here who wants to be a founder and lead a team, and they're hearing about how your experience has been, and it's a source of inspiration. So thank you for coming and also sharing how you started, how the team has been, and the projects that you have worked on. It's also great to see that you're already applying some of the things and insights that Melissa already shared about consistency and the decision making. So you're on the right path, right? Um, you when you started your presentation, you said that this will be chaotic, right? It seems like you have managed it, right?
Yeah.
And why your studio is called Organized Chaos. I could be wrong, but you can answer that together with this. Leading a group of people, especially in a creative industry, is not always the easiest work. So, what is keeping you going and wanting to push and make the studio successful?
I'm sorry. Please come the question again. I think I missed that.
Right. So, why you named your studio Organized Chaos, right? And the second
Oh
question
yes.
is
Yeah.
leadership in the creative industry is not a very easy
Mhm.
task. So, what is keeping you going and wanting to make your studio successful?
Yeah. So the first one, organized chaos, because when I was starting, when I was thinking of a name for the company or for the studio, organized chaos feels like the perfect name, because when you're thinking of a game is basically a mixture of multiple things, um, um, code, music, sounds, art, all these things that are chaotic in their own form, but are being organized together to create something, right? So I was like, oh, this is like organized chaos. That's how the name like kind of came about. Like, we are forming like organization with all this chaos. And for the second question, again, I lost track of the second question. If you could come again with the second question.
Yeah, what keeps you going?
Oh yeah, a lot, a lot. So the main thing that keeps me going is to have a like. I look at the African industry right now, and I see a lot of like potential in like our stories, in our games, in our talent. And I want us to like if it's not even just organized chaos, if it's not Maliyo, it's like someone. And but the idea is like we all have to kind of like be the stepping stone, like the shoulders that like people stand on, right? So what keeps me going is just layering the blocks that someone eventually would be able to, stand on and show to the world that like Africa is like that place that also builds games, right, that are fun and enjoyable, right? And and it's a potential place for business too as well, because business is important. Apart from just the fun in general, business is also important. It has to be a potential business commodity. Over 1 billion devices, there is a huge number of like um I'm not even a business person. I have no background in business, that's much background in business. I'm more of like a technical person, but I when I look at the numbers, I'm like, if we could just have 25% of that, it's more than enough to help boost like Africa's economy, right? So these are the things that drive me every day to like push to see if we could force ourselves to like create a new industry within this, within our continent.
Amazing. We need a lot of that in the continent, and we can't wait to see how organized chaos grows within the next year, in 5 years, right? We have a question from Justice. So we have two questions actually. So Justice is asking, Andy, if you were to start building a game studio all over again, how would you do it?
um I would start with mobile. So when I started, I didn't really believe in the power of mobile because I wasn't really I think I wasn't really exposed to mobile. I'm someone who started with like consoles and PC gaming, so I was always like, I don't really care about mobile. I feel like I could always go straight to like the PC master race people, right? And I watched mobile go by till now, right? Which I feel like I regret. I've really regretted that decision. Um, so that's something I would do. I would definitely focus on mobile because again, as you saw in my slides, I've been even 2017. I was still in school. I was doing my internships. I think that was like I was in my second year in school, right? So I would, if I was doing something there, I would have had a lot of experience, like by now, understanding like the scope of the market, or even having like an app there or something like that for my studio, rather than focusing on anything else like PC Master Race or anything like that. Which you also have to understand. At that time, there was no server for like West Africa on Steam, or even any pipeline for PlayStation for like, if you're an African studio, how do you get your game on PlayStation? So like these were things that, as a naive, however old person I was, um, I would readjust and tell myself, no, focus on mobile for now. It's still gaming. You would still learn. It's all part of the experience.
All right, thanks, Andy, for that. So Justice has a follow-up. He was part of the GameUp Africa Bootcamp last year, and he was learning programming. He wants to build a game studio, and he's currently learning Blender to learn to create his own assets for his games. Do you have any advice for him?
So what's like? Are you just like trying to just make assets? Like, what's the plan? Um, you're just making assets. What's the plan? Do you plan to use the assets for something? Oh, okay. You plan to make your own assets to build your games. Well, it's a lot more deeper than that. You need to have like, okay. So this is what I'll tell you. Um, Making games is you have to have a plan in place. Um, Maybe you could. Everyone is different. Everyone is different. This is like a very open-ended question. So what I'll tell you to do is, you know, there are communities in Ghana. I'm guessing you're in Ghana because I think when I looked up a little, I think I saw he said he was in Ghana or wherever you are. There are communities that you could meet up with people who are actually looking for 3D artists, right? There are developers who are looking for 3D artists who want to work together, right? So that you don't have to worry about the development. You do the art, you do the arts and the animation. They do the coding. You work together with those people, right? Even I'm willing. We could exchange. We could meet up later. We could exchange, we could work together, right? So these are opportunities that are available. You don't have to necessarily do everything on your own. So you just focus on still improving your skill. And then when you get to a point where you think, okay, you are good enough, you've learned everything you need to learn, both about running a studio and also your own 3D skills, you can move on to start your own studio. That's what I'll tell you to do. Learn, improve your own skills, learn what it takes to like run a game studio, build a game studio, whatever it is. Have those skills in there. Like it will take a year, it will take 2 years, whatever it is, right? And then when you think, okay, I've got to the point where I think I understand what it takes, like obviously you still not learn everything, but you have enough knowledge. From there, you can now leave and start your own studio. The thing is, we're a community. Like, no one's going to hold you and go like, "Oh, why did you leave?" When things were getting good. Like, it's a community. When you leave, we are still friends. We check up on each other. If we still need advice, everyone still helps each other. That's how it should be. So I think that's a good thing. If like whoever it is, try and get like into a studio, work with someone, you know, get under someone, learn, see how like the day-to-days of like working in a studio, learn from that and still improve on your own skill. From there, after a year or two, or 6 to 9 months, however you think it will take to like improve your skill, or how much it takes to like soak in that knowledge. After that time, you move out and also save money too as well, because starting your own studio is not cheap. Soak in, save money, prep down, start your studio. That's what I suggest you do.
All right. We're going to take one final question. This is from Neurocodes. How do you transition from a 9 to 5 to running a game studio?
Hmm. Do you like luck is I'm sorry, the answer is very simple. I was going to say something very stupid, but the answer is very simple. It's a lot of luck and also planning. So you plan a lot, like you have to plan before you do it, and also a lot of luck is involved. Like for me, for example, I did plan, and then also there was quite a lot of luck involved. Because like for example, Maliyo had this, and also there are fewer things ahead of me that I can, I'm like in terms of grants and things I can put in to like get some money down financially. So there's a lot of luck involved, and that's the same for everyone. So you have to keep that in mind if you are planning to do something like that.
All right, that will be the end of this. Thank you so much, Andy, for sharing your experience and
Okay.
continue to inspiring others who are also following behind you and learning from the journey. And all the best with organized chaos. As we
Thank you.
plan to wrap this up, we'd also like to hear from all of you to get to understand what you think of this event. Are there some things are there speakers that you'd want us to have more of in the coming months? Let us know, and also how we can improve. So I'm going to leave this running here for 2 minutes. Scan the QR code. A link will also be sent in the chat. Please fill this very quickly. It just takes a short time, and we will conclude. All right. Thank you all so much for attending this session. And thank you to our amazing speakers, Melissa, the director of Games Leadership Academy, and Andy, the founder of Organized Chaos. There's always so much to learn from people. And if you would like to showcase your game or project with us, we're going to share a link in the chat and you can apply to showcase in March. We have this meetup every single month on the third Wednesday of the month. So we'll be planning this again and we hope to see you there. Bye bye. Enjoy the rest of your day.